When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadavji, your podcast host, a practicing clinical social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 29. The breakthrough of a high-functioning empath meets malfunctioning mental health habits. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our lovely and daring guest, Parul Pandya. Founder of Community Impact Consulting, Parul has been skillfully working in nonprofit in various roles through the past decade, including as a community builder, consultant, programmer, and producer. After managing community grants for the largest government funder in Canada, she received much interest for continued collective impact by being asked to serve organizations in a variety of capacities. Her attraction to advocacy emerged with her work as a queer South Asian freelance writer and poet over 2 decades ago. She has a deep passion for ethics and social justice, which she teaches at Centennial College. She is also a huge advocate for mental health and wellness, collaborating with a variety of organizations to provide space and support. Her approach to exchange is a high engagement approach, encouraging participation through self-reflection, empathy, creativity, and common understanding. Parul has a deep appreciation for plants, playing plant mom to over 100 in her urban jungle. She also loves watching the Toronto Raptors and Toronto Blue Jays, as well as a lot of true crime. Hi, Parul. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Thank you so much, Selena, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you kindly for the lovely invitation.
Oh my goodness, Parul, I'm so excited to have you on the show. So I'm thankful to you that you are here and that you're ready to chat with me and that you bring this willingness and this really special energy to share and just even be here to support that taking stance to help break barriers of mental stigma. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much. Those are such kind words, and they go straight to the heart. So thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Okay, Parul. So in case you're still wondering, I'm not sure you are, but just in case you are, the podcast here is bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether it's directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And so one thing that we know, which is pretty clear, is that there is impact on someone's mental health no matter what the story is. And there is that one part that does remain tucked away. So with this platform, it really serves in a way to break those barriers of mental stigma. So that's my hope, that very much have been conditioned in our society. So, speaking with guests like yourself, I hope this is really a step forward. Really encouraging people to share and tell what those individuals typically have reservations for expressing. So that's why I'm bringing forward a trend, and it's called the mental beauty rethink. So what do you think, Parul?
I think that, what you've just said is so vitally important that, and having a platform like this to be able to share our stories, I think makes us realize, the, I think it's so important that we connect and understand that others are going through what we're going through. And I know for myself and my journey, that was one of the most gratifying and humbling, reflections of the work that I do, was just being able to have others be like, I'm not alone. So absolutely, the critical importance of creating these sorts of conversations and space, also very much in the South Asian community, which is the community that I come from as well, I think is essentially important, so that we don't suffer in silence, and we can empower ourselves to speak our truth without feeling any shame around that truth.
Exactly. You really hit it bang on, right? Like, it's really about being able to speak our truth, really talk about what's good for me, what's not good for me without feeling any reprimand, right? Just that freedom to really feel liberated to say whatever it is that's really going on for each person.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think it's an important and powerful journey that, all of us will have to take, because at some
Hmm.
point or another, I'm sure, each human being is going to experience some sort of challenge when it comes to their mental health and well-being. So I think that when we approach it with more of a humane approach, if I may,
Hmm.
and not so taboo around the subject of actually speaking about these things, what we do is we're actually humanizing some of these things, some of these challenges that may be invisible challenges. So I'm always 100% on board on creating space and conversation just around what you're doing here today, Salima.
Oh, thank you. This is great. And I really love hearing about your perspective and how there's like you get it. So that's the best part. We just talked about the humanizing and normalizing and neutralizing. I think that we have quite a bit of work to do, but I'm hoping that this is something that at least it's a starter.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So shall we begin?
Let's begin.
Okay, I've got some daring questions for you, but I think it's going to be great.
I'm very excited.
All right. Okay, Parul, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
Yes, so my headline would read,
Mm-hmm.
through growing my self resilience, I
Mm-hmm.
found my own form of resistance.
Okay, so let me see if I got that. Through growing my self resilience, I found my own form of resistance.
That is correct.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Yeah, so it was such first of all, I loved this idea of just creating a headline. What I really was hoping to articulate through this headline, again, through growing my self resilience, I found my own form of resistance, is that, I don't think that when we are in a place of crisis, or, we are faced with some sort of, decline of our mental health, that we are usually in a place where we can think, past that. We're kind of just in it and in that moment with it. And one of the things that I learned, because it's been quite a long journey for me, and it was very much probably about 5 or 6 years where I was struggling really deeply with my mental health, and not really finding the tools or the support that I was at the time that I needed in order to be able to kind of improve my mental health. So what I actually found is, during that time, I learned so much about myself. And the main thing I learned was about my own self
Mhm.
resilience, that even in a place of,
Mhm.
vulnerability, or you unrest, sometimes it was felt even chaotic. I found that, being able to actually acknowledge now after the fact just how darn strong I was.
Mhm.
And that really, now I carry that forward into my days, my days and my nights, my, my work life. And I always think about, taking a moment to like care for yourself and be with yourself, despite what the world says around the 9 to 5 and the hustle,
Mhm.
really being in tune with your own needs,
Mhm.
really, focusing on that resilience as a place of strength really does give you an overt way to resist some of the pressures that are external pressures,
Mhm.
right? It's a place of retreat for me. It's a place where I can, where I still have to catch myself to think, oh goodness, like, I should be doing this. Meanwhile, my body's like, no, you're tired. You need to relax.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I think that what I've learned is to, really understand that when I am tuning myself, that, there is a need to be able to really, rest and come into not comparing myself to others in terms of like productivity, and or, or expectations for that matter as well. So I think that's really, where I was going with that headline, Salima.
Mhm. No, it's full of so much rich themes, like of what I understand is going to be more of it's going to emerge as we unpack your untold story. But that tells so much when you talk about the resilience and you talk about the resistance, and really learning that when you tune into yourself and you learn to check in and see what are my needs, like regardless of what other people are doing or saying or what their accomplishments are, what is productive to them. Because if you don't take care of yourself, there's no way you can be productive. And even though we know this and we've heard the saying so often, but you took that in, you internalized it and made it something new, which allowed you to get to this place of self-resilience. So I think it's beautiful the way you sort of walked us through that. That's really lovely.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think that I'm guilty of, like many others, of, giving others advice and really sound advice, and, not practicing what I preach.
Yeah, I was just
So
about to say, you got to practice what you preach, my dear, right? But it's a learning curve. It's a learning curve.
absolutely a learning curve, but I also know
Mhm.
that I have to hold myself accountable, right?
Yes.
Like, though there
Yes.
is definitely a learning curve to
Mhm.
it all, I also give myself, like, the space to say, like,
Yeah.
this is what you need. It doesn't matter if that's not what this person needs or that's not what the expectation is. This is honoring what you need, right?
Exactly. It's regardless of what someone else needs, it's really checking in with yourself. What do you need? What's good for you? What's going to be most helpful for you in this moment?
Absolutely, 100%.
So I am so curious. Tell us more about your untold story.
Yeah, so I am really, first of all, just I want to acknowledge again that I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to share with folk. And I just want to say, before I kind of share my story is everyone's story. We're all connected, and I truly believe that we can find strength in each other if we're able to be vulnerable about some of the things that perhaps have challenged us in our lives.
Mhm.
So I will say that my story, probably I would give it about 10 years ago. I had a pretty immense break in my mental health, and it was due to a combination of anxiety. And now, what I can recognize with as someone who has dealt with depression, a couple of times throughout the course of my life, that there was probably a little bit of underlying depression happening at the time as well.
Okay.
And what really ended up showing up was that I became severely an insomniac.
Right.
And it led me to a point where, in fact, I was micro sleeping for about 3 or 4 months, which was, I was sleeping minutes a day. The challenging thing in that time and that space, now that I've had some time and time has passed, is just being that feeling of dread. And I can't describe it more. It was absolute dread, because I felt like I was in a state where I was high functioning in that
Mhm.
sense. Like I was working for a majority of that period. I, like, to the external world, I didn't look much different. And perhaps that was, one of the most frustrating things is that, I really felt like I was fading away. I was fading away, and I wasn't able to quite recognize myself.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
if I looked in the mirror, or even just, the way that I was going about my days. And that led me to really, have an extreme decline in my health, to the point, where it was
Mhm.
probably closest to the, I guess, the, highest peak of this decline, if that makes sense. Um, it was actually, at the time I was, working at a job, and my manager, my supervisor at the time, came from a background in social services, and as a social worker. And she actually recognized, some of that behavioral change, and actually did a one on one intervention with me, which I am forever grateful with. And said, are you okay? And to be honest, the whole time I was kind of going through that, it was less about people asking me if I was okay, and more people assuring me that I was going to be okay. And that was a huge pivot, right? For someone to actually just be like, "Are you okay?" And for me to respond and say, "No, I am not okay." And as I said, it was the first time that people, of course, folks are, friends and family are trying to be encouraging, but it was the first time I really had a breakthrough of being honest, with myself, and saying, like, no, I actually am not okay. I'm not okay. And I actually am running on empty, and fearful at this point that that gas tank is, already on empty. So, what is it that I really have left to give?
To
Yeah.
give, yeah. Right. And so, during that process, I know originally before when you said that, you had internalized a lot of it. And so from the outside, it looked like you were doing okay for the most part. I guess my question to you is like, as you started to assess that empty tank, right? What did you do different? Like, did you take time off work, or did you reduce your work role or tasks, or what happened?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. Salima, I actually ended up, that intervention that I had mentioned a little earlier with
Hmm.
my manager at the time.
Yes.
She was gracious enough to actually say to me, do you think you can benefit from a leave? And, I immediately was frozen, because I'm obviously in the sense of fear of being like, oh my gosh, like my employment, like my income, like, in a perfect world, like I am a single person in the city of Toronto. So, I don't really have that resources to fall back on. So, the initial instinct was the panic of being like, how am I gonna, how am I gonna get by? How am I gonna pay
Right.
my bills, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what? She eased all of that. And she said, listen, if you need it this time, like, I don't want you to worry about anything. I'm going to make sure that you are, compensated during your time away. I'm going to figure out how that works with HR. And, you take your time, based on what you need, you let us know, and, we'll have you back when you're ready to come back. I mean, that was massive, right? Because what it actually
That's a
took,
huge blessing.
yeah, and what it did, Salima, was it actually took the onus off of me, where I wasn't already in a
Mhm.
state where, I was thinking very clearly. So it really, I honestly, to this day, just owe that woman, immense gratitude for, really taking that seriously with me, and kind of almost steering me in that direction. So yes, I actually
Yeah.
ended up taking, what was initially supposed to be 2 months leave, and,
Mhm.
close, and that time, what it gave me was, the opportunity to, increase what I was already doing, which was, seeking different resources and support. And really
Mhm.
going out there and exploring. I think that was the first time, I looked into acupuncture. I think it was the first time I went to go see a Chinese medicine doctor. There
Mhm.
was just a variety of different, things that I was able to do within that time. And it ended up being that, close to my 2 month mark, I didn't feel I was quite there yet. And so I
Mhm.
actually asked it for an extension of another month. So it ended up being that, yeah, I did take 3 months off of work. And literally, during that time, the only thing that was my focus was like on how to seek support and build support from within to get better.
Yeah, it sounds like you really had that opportunity to tune in. I'm really grateful as well that you had this manager, this person who could see that, okay, this person is struggling. There's some, like, this person needs help and it's okay that they need help. So, this whole idea of not being judged, but taken care of. And so, it's like the decisions that were not going to be helpful for you to make when you're are in that overwhelmed state, for someone to remove that burden for you so that you could just focus on what was actually happening in and around you. That's an incredible experience to be able to have had.
Absolutely. And that's something that like really actually opened me up, Salima, to be really open about my journey because, I feel like I've been, despite challenges in my life and, being a queer South Asian woman coming out at 18 years old,
Mhm.
that I have really been supported and loved, and sometimes I didn't see it coming, like that this manager 20 years later or, 15 years later, I would still think of her so fondly. But
Mhm.
honestly, I
Mhm.
think that was a big thing that really encourages me to have these exchanges with folks like yourself, Salima, because I think it's essentially important that, I am being supported and I'm being guided and I'm being loved through my ups and my downs. And that gives me strength to speak my truth.
It's, really, I can hear the strength in your voice as you speak, which is like I'm, like, cheering you on, in my mind. And I'm just like, "Way to go, Parul.
Thank
Way to
you.
go." Like, 'cause it's like you've really owned it, right? Like, you've really owned it, you've, like, embodied it. But now I'm also curious, so about 10 years ago when all this was happening, could you recognize, what you were lacking? Or maybe you didn't recognize then, but looking back now, like, reflecting back on that, what did you feel you were lacking? Like, there must have been some sort of signals, like our emotions, our body signals things to us. So what kind of signals were you having? I mean, I know you became a true insomniac, but were there other signals that were coming up for you?
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of it had to do with just childhood trauma, and a lot of that I'd experienced that I've never, sought support or even really reconciled within myself. So
Mhm.
I would say that break was, it was something that was cumulative. It was a
Mhm.
variety of things that kind of came to pass, that including, a lot of past traumas that really had been not dealt with. And again, the fact that, more often than not, I kind of was the kind of person, which I believe a lot of us are, was when we face trauma or, we face challenges, what we tend to do is like push them down, right? And I feel like residually, a lot of that had been pushed down. And
Right.
quite honestly, I think that it just took, a couple of instigating, occurrences to really kind of bridge up everything that, led to a state of a hyper complex, mental and physical state.
Yeah. You have a pretty amazing energy. And I know when you described how, you were high functioning at the time as well. So were you able to protect that energy, or did it come a time where you couldn't protect the energy anymore, your own energy?
Yeah. That is a wonderful, wonderful question. And I appreciate that you asked it. I was not protecting that energy at all.
Okay.
In fact, it took my experience. I actually went to go see a psychic. I went to go see a psychic who actually shared a very similar name to you. But, this was, again, quite a few years back. And I kind of sat down with her. And immediately she said to me, "You're an empath, aren't you?" And I was like, "Excuse me?" And it was very interesting because aside from like connecting with her around the mediumship aspect
Mhm.
of it all, we actually had a lot of like in tune conversation. And that was where I received for the first time the advice and to understand how to protect myself. And we had a conversation around setting barriers, especially as an empath, and understanding that, as an empath, when we walk through the world, we pick up on everything.
Right.
And understanding like how to, filter those things, number one.
Mhm.
And that was again just the beginning of that journey. But that conversation really helped me to think about, number one, filtering that energy, but also setting just clear boundaries
Mhm.
around that. And that very much, comes back to what we had spoken about a little earlier, which is that I realized through that conversation that, this was not a healthy, but also it was not something that could continue longer. Like that I literally was just going to burn myself out, and I had to figure out a way to, use my empathy, and in a way that obviously serves the greater good, but also to learn to tune it in a way that, like, it doesn't leave me completely under resourced in when it comes to taking care of myself.
Right. Filtering and boundary setting is so important when you need to recultivate your energy levels and learn what makes it thrive and what sort of gets it to deplete, because no one's going to understand that except for yourself, because we each operate differently. So what a lesson to be able to continue to learn about yourself in such a different way. That must have had a big impact on how you moved forward and part of your pivot when you started to understand the energy of an empath and your giving and your receiving and what you needed to have it balance.
Yes, absolutely. It was pretty pivotal. In fact, I remember leaving and, I had about a 15-minute walk to my house from the clinic that I had gone to, or the area where I'd gone to meet this individual. And I remember like, um, I can't remember. I think I was listening to Whitney Houston on my headphones.
Mm-hmm.
That's nothing new. I'm always listening to Whitney. I was listening to Whitney, just belting some amazing, powerful tunes, and I just remember I was crying. Like I literally
Mm,
cried. People on the street must have been like, "This
yeah.
lady's like walking down the street with her headphones on, with
Yeah.
just." But not crying like, when you're like, it was just like tears just dripping down my cheek. Like it
Yes.
almost felt like a cathartic
Yes.
more than sad. It felt cathartic.
Well, you probably started to understand what was happening,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? It was probably the first time where you weren't as scared, but perhaps it's like sad, like you're allowing yourself to feel what the whole experience was, what that suppression was about, and learning that, oh my goodness, this is what I have control over. This is how I can work it. Like, this is what's been going on. It's like you got answers.
That's right. And not even necessarily, answers that I was seeking, but that I
Hmm.
found that ended up being like, insatiably valuable to me on
Yeah.
my.
Like puzzle pieces, right?
Yes,
Like puzzle pieces.
that's right. Exactly.
Right. Right. So, Parul, when people tell me their different stories, outside of the therapy room, inside the therapy room, they tell me about, when they're going through those moments of anxiety and underlying depression and that part of mental health taking over. A common thread that I've heard people say, individuals tell me, is that the thing that they realized they were lacking is that sense of joy, that there was no joy for them, like everything was like autopilot, that it just nothing made them feel like they had feelings of anything desirable. Can you relate to that at all?
Oh my goodness, can I ever relate to that? I think actually it was that lack of joy
Mm-hmm.
that petrified me. Like it
Mm.
petrified me because I could not find joy in my days. And though I had gone through, I had had acute depression before and I'd gone through it before, like I was always able to find some sense of, oh, hang out with my sister and watch a terrible movie or something like that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
though it wasn't, the greatest amount of joy, I
Mm-hmm.
could still feel it, right? Like it felt a little bit like like there was something connecting there. But I just felt at that stage and in that point, like I was completely, I almost felt like I had antennas that were just going haywire, and I was like looking and looking, and I could not find joy. Like I could not
Right.
find joy, and the only thing I literally could find joy in, was caring for my cats. At the time, I had two cats, one that passed about a year ago, Nifa, rest in peace.
Mm.
But, that was the only thing that I could find joy in, was caring for them. So nurturing them and being, being that I was their only human and I was their caretaker, that was the only thing that I could find joy in, was like their love and their affection. And that,
Mm-hmm.
that despite the fact that, I was compromised or unwell, like that was something that was steady. So it really, really grounded me fundamentally. But yeah, absolutely. That sense of like, lack of joy was immensely disturbing to me because I am, a very outgoing person.
Right.
I'm an
It must have been so foreign, especially if you couldn't tap into what was going on.
exactly. I'm like, I'm turning on, I'm watching my favorite movies. I'm turning on like my favorite sports teams. I'm like, nothing is really helping picking
So
me
all the coping that you knew, all the things that would make you feel better or that had been good for you before, none of those things seem to be options to shift anything.
That's correct, exactly. So, those
Wow.
tools that I had used in the past or those areas
Hmm.
that I accessed in the past, like it was, the best way I can describe it, Salima, is I felt flat. I felt
Mm,
completely flat, like, and I was terrified. And I really got to the point where, I was so terrified that I was so terrified that, I actually started to believe. And obviously, after lack sleep deprivation and a whole bunch of other things, that come along with that, I started to just think like, oh my gosh, this is what I am now. I'm now like
mhm,
a shell of myself. And, because I struggled for, a couple of years with climbing out of that crisis, I really started to think, because it lasted quite a long time, that, that life and that happy person and that go lucky person that I knew was like something of the past.
yeah, I can't imagine what that was like going through that, feeling those intense emotions. I mean, clearly there were signals, trying to sort of let you know that something's not okay. But I just can't imagine what it was like to bear all of that at that time. My goodness. So I'm curious, Parul. So you went through all of this, right? And so it took a toll on your mental health. And I'm sure it also took a toll on your physical health too, right? Like, I mean, the fact that you weren't sleeping and I don't know, like, were you able to did you have any energy to exercise or to have your nutrition getting through it, like that was what was the physical impact like for you? How long did you notice it to be really prominent?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good question. Absolutely. It affected every area of my life. So there was no exercise. There was a lot, like, because I was just so residually exhausted. So there
Mhm.
was just a lot of laying around and sadly not sleeping, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But yeah, that's, you bring up a point which is very, very, very important. And I'm going to reflect on that in just a second, if I may. But, the fact was that, I was not eating properly. If, I was not eating nutritious. I was probably not even eating regularly, and there was no exercise. Like I literally was just stale.
Mhm.
I spent a lot of my time, just kind of like laying there, feeling sick, to be
Mhm.
honest, like
Mhm.
exhausted from not sleeping, nauseous, and also just in my, like, I literally at that point in time too, my anxiety was so high that I look back now and I'm like, I never had a moment of silence.
Mm.
Like it
Right.
was, there was always a mile a minute in my head, like, oh, da, 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 this,
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Like it was just chaos. So I was not able to, even pull on some of the things that, like, now I think I would be able to a little bit better. But, I was not even able to think of some of those things like, oh, go out and get some fresh air, just maybe for 20 minutes, and it might help your mood a little bit or something. Like, I didn't have anything to
You
give.
didn't have the capacity to even formulate those simple plans.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Parul, when people come to see me for therapy, individuals typically tend to be in one of three places. Sometimes they're getting started, where they need to unpack or uncover parts of their journey or a big part of their journey. Some people are in the thick of it and they really need some support navigating through what is happening in and around them. And some people are looking back, maybe requiring closure on certain aspects, or looking back because they're in a reflective place, wanting to be able to take stock of what was good for them and what wasn't good for them, and also trying to pivot themselves for further growth. So, what part of the journey would you say that you're in? Would you say that you're getting started in the middle, or looking back?
You know, if it what I don't think like life is a linear journey. If I may, what I'm gonna say is I feel like I'm over the hump.
Okay.
Like, I'm over the hump. That hump that was that that hump that, like, I couldn't get over.
Yeah.
I do feel like I have gotten over that hump. And I feel like, back to a little bit earlier what you had said, Salima, which is, how long residual were you affected by this? Honestly, it felt like it was a good 3 years after, when I started seeking proper support. I actually landed on a medication that, I am still on till this day, that I'm grateful for, after a lot of trial and
Mm-hmm.
error of a lot of different pharmaceutical medications. Also, being, keenly aware that I was willing to take, I wasn't closed minded about, I don't want to take this or I don't want to do that. I was kind of like, you know what, stack me up on what I need. Like, I'm happy to take whatever it took. So,
Yes.
it did take an extensive amount of time to kind of, get myself out of that funk or that place. So I would say that right now I kind of feel like I'm mid and a little further than mid. On that journey. And that, I think, more I'm accounting it to just where I'm at in terms of my age and my experience, turning 40 this year, and
Woo!
being almost at
Okay.
that midlife, and the 40s are the
Mm-hmm.
new 20s, they say, or the new 30s. So, and
Yeah.
seeing how that all works out. But
Right.
yeah, I'm just knowing that I've gotten over that hump, and I'm somewhere in that middle past of that journey.
Yeah. It's kind of like you're in one of those in between spaces. And that's okay too. It's just nice to know where you are. It's nice for us, for each person to kind of reflect on where they are, because I think wherever you've told me, like as you said, like I'm in the middle, but I'm kind of a little bit further than just right in the middle. My curiosity lends to, what do you want to remember about the process of your healing journey to date? Because as you said, you're past the hump. So what do you want to remember?
Oh, what I want to remember is that
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that we learn that are negative for us, both mental and physical decisions, when it comes to our wellness and our well-being, are habitual. And what I want to remember, and what I always remind myself, is that, I don't need to hold on to habits that don't serve me.
Mm-hmm.
And also that, that it does take resistance to get past those habits that, are familiar but don't serve you as well.
Mm-hmm.
There is like a little bit of conflict, and, and also you may just be like, yeah, I don't really want to do all that. I just kind of want to, sit down and read a book. um,
Right.
but yeah, I think that is the most thing that what I hold on to through moving through that experience and continuing to really, advocate and work on my mental health and support others, is just always remembering that sometimes we hold on to things that are actually not healthy for us, that are habitual, that are psychological, that are trauma related, and that there is no place to bottle these things up inside, and that, like, that our journey, as much as, the spiritual journey and so on, is that from the inside. I'm the kind of person who wears my heart on my sleeve, and if anything, I think I'm the kind of the person who lives her life inside out for others to see. And that's a very strange habit that I've had from when I was a young writer. So just making sure that I always remember to understand that, some habits that I may have still may be harmful to me, and I am capable of change. I am willing to change, and I will do what is needed in order to become, like, happier, healthier, and all of those wonderful things that follow.
Mm-hmm. I really, really admire your process and your reflection. And that really is like a healing signature. That's, it's kind of like you could stamp it. I might even steal or borrow what you said, live life inside out. It's very catchy. It says so much.
Yeah,
It says so much. It
thank
really
you.
does.
Thank you. I think some people would literally run in the opposite direction if I said that to them, because they must be like, "That's a little too much."
I
But,
love it.
but I think that that's,
I
you know,
welcome that. No, for
thank
sure.
you. Thank you, yes.
Yeah. And you said some really important things, right? Like, some habits are not healthy. And just because they're habits, it will take work, but it's important to work through them. And I like how you broke it down to say that, I need to remember that, there, as much as I might have broken through many of the habits, some of the habits might have a knee-jerk reaction, right? Like they might show up again. So I have to remember that these habits are habits and that they're harmful. And even though they're harmful, habits can be broken. Like you are capable of change. So you're reminding yourself that you're capable of change, and then that you're willing to change, because those are two different prongs. And you need both in order to break a habit. First of all, you need to understand that you are capable of
Yes.
change, because a habit is formed through a conditioned sort of process which we engage in. So we can undo that. And the willingness needs to be there. So the fact that you're able to take those two prongs, you can really assess your habits at any time and make decisions that are really good for you. And, I'm still curious. So, Parul, now I know we've talked a lot about your mental health in terms of what you had gone through about 10 years ago, and the struggle with anxiety and the underlying depression and the insomnia and all of the things that were happening. Is there anything else about the impact of your mental health that we haven't spoken about, or anything else that you think we would need to sort of highlight a bit more?
I think one of the things that I, want to shout out, and because I think that it was also vitally important, is that I had such an immense support system.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I know not everybody is in a situation where they have, a support system that is solid, or family and friends are not, within an arm's reach or whatever it may be. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that what I would say is that I could have not got through that situation. The number one person I'm going to shout out is my sister. She just hung with me, like she hung with me through those moments, and she believed in me. And
Mm-hmm.
also that, that she was the person that was voicing when, especially for example, when we were, at the doctor or something, because at that point I was just so gone that if I didn't have her advocate for my needs, I wouldn't maybe have received some of the supports that I would have. That all to say that I know that not all of us are blessed with a support system in that sort of way. But I
Mm-hmm.
was, and
Mm-hmm.
I acknowledge that day in day out. I have the best girlfriends in the world. My mom is amazing, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just that was just absolutely a pivotal piece to allow me to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that support is unwavering if I was to encounter um, further challenges in the future.
Right. Absolutely. And support is so important. And I always tell people, like, you get to choose who they are, right? So some people are fortunate, as yourself, to have a really tight system of support, but it doesn't mean you can't find your supports in different nooks and crannies as well. But what do you remember about that time of not having a moment of silence in your mind? How disruptive was that? Because that must have been really disruptive to your mental health and how you recovered.
It was like a nuclear bomb in my
Oh
brain.
my goodness.
And honestly, like what I remember is shout out to my therapist that I worked with for about 8 or 9 years. One of the things I remember that I learned as part of, the
Hmm.
therapy was talking about like recognizing catastrophic thinking, and that was one thing that, though I was not in control of my thoughts at that point,
Hmm.
I started to recognize like that I was being dire about everything, that everything was like, oh my gosh, like it's going to be the worst. This is going to be this and this is going to be that. So though I didn't feel like I was in a place of control, what I was able to do is start recognizing that
Hmm.
pattern, that behavioral pattern of constantly like going to a dark place or like the worst place. And I remember specifically, like, when she introduced me to this concept, like sitting there and she ran through a couple of scenarios with me, and she's like, what are the chances of this happening? And more often, the chances were slim to none. But somehow, your mind fools you to start thinking, oh my gosh, this is the worst,
Mhm.
and the
Mhm.
worst
Mhm.
outcome is going to be the only outcome. So I think that, like, though I was still not in a place of what I would say better control than as I am now, I would say I started to at least, like, flirt with some of
Mhm.
those ideas of the tools that I was learning through my various support systems. And that was one that was huge because everything was going into that, like, place of, mass explosion. And you're like, geez, like, well, no wonder you feel like, crap. You're constantly having really dark thoughts, or like, so I started to kind of, if I may school myself a little bit, I wasn't able to pull myself out, but I started to, like, recognize it.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, when you start recognizing your patterns and giving it names, and you can put them into little categories in your mind, so it's easier to, like, it's therapeutic to label and go, oh, that's the catastrophic thinking. When you do that, it's like you've externalized it, so you're not taking it in, and then you're like, oh, I can see that, right? Then your new thought process can get activated. So it's really great to hear about that process for you. So, Parul, what would you say is your key message to the listeners of our show?
First and foremost, that, if you are currently struggling, with any sort of mental health, or any sort of, mental wellness issue, that, number one, you're not alone. And
Mm-hmm.
though you may feel like you're alone, because a lot of it, feels like it's something that's happening to you, and it is, like, happening to you, right? Like, physically and mentally and so
Mm-hmm.
on. One of the most important things that I learned is that, 1 in 5 people will encounter some sort of mental health, crisis, whether it's circumstantial, or, it's something that comes up as a result of something, else. But at the same point, just remembering you're not alone, but also remembering to be patient with yourself. Because what I learned from my journey was that that was, maybe not typical. And what I mean by that is, I was open to, I started my journey the same way as I imagine, quite a few people didn't do, and, really kind of took the approach of Western medicine as, like, the means of, trying to combat, or trying to, make oneself better. But what I also learned is to be open to, trying new things, trying things that are maybe foreign to you or unusual to you. But no matter what, always find what works for you. And the last thing I'll say is that, like, back to that patience thing, just be patient with yourself, because I honestly am not exaggerating when I'm telling you I probably tried like 10 to 15 different types of pharmaceutical medications, before I actually landed on one that worked for me.
Right.
And then moving things into, practice when it comes to my physical health, has been a little bit of a back and forth. So give yourself the kindness and compassion that you give others.
Right.
Give yourself the time and the space to seek the help or seek the support that you need. But please don't get frustrated if, you go to one appointment and, like, that's not going to work out for you. Like, remember that you are unique and you are beautiful, and there's, no matter what you may believe in any given moment, there's hope. And it may not feel like it in a certain moment, but there is always hope, and that you are strong, you are resilient, you are beautiful. So I just think it's a word of encouragement to be kind, gentle, and loving with yourself.
Wow. It's a really beautiful message. And I am so grateful that you have this message for the listeners. That's wonderful. So I'm also curious, Parul, about what is that game-changing inspiration for you that's close to you that reflects your untold story? So would there be like a quote or a book or a person or an event, something that spoke to you?
Yes, absolutely. So, one of the things that I found quite helpful, especially when I was going through some of the challenges, was really looking for inspiration from others. Being someone who is a writer, I always found strength in words, and, in art, being that I work in the arts and so on. So I would say that one person I really gravitated to, when I was struggling, and, and also just looking for more deeper understanding, was the Sufi poet Rumi.
Mm-hmm.
And a quote of his, which I think is exactly, describes itself quite beautifully. He says, "Stay with it. The wound is the place where the light enters you."
Wow. Ah, it's such a beautiful quote.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You know, it's so powerful because, we all are broken in our own ways. Maybe we don't articulate it as broken, maybe we don't, but let's say we're all imperfect,
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that is a fair assumption to
Yes.
make.
Yes. Yes. We are perfectly imperfect. That's the motto I use.
That's it, and I
Yeah.
know, with the work that I do and the professionally, personally, I just know that it is because I have been through these things that I am able to be a strong, powerful, outspoken. So I see beauty in the wounds. I see beauty in not even if they're not
Mm.
wounds anymore, if they've turned into scars, like I want to wear them proudly. It's a testament to my
Mhm.
resilience.
Yeah, we had an earlier guest on our show, and she talked about wounds like scars, like badges,
Wow.
badges of honor. And I was like, I love that because I have a scar somewhere that I thought made me so not beautiful. And when she said that to me, I mean, I've worked through a lot of that part that was bothering me when I was younger. But when she said that, I was like, I never thought about that. But it's a badge of honor.
Exactly.
That badge of honor is a lesson, it's a teaching, it's a remembering, but not just remembering of pain, but remembering of what you've overcome, remembering of who you are today because of that.
Absolutely, 100%. She hit it on the nail. I couldn't
I
have said it better
Yeah,
myself. And I think
yeah.
that often, again, we're taught to hide scars. Like, these things are ugly, they're
Mhm.
unbecoming, like, we go
Mhm.
get cosmetic
Mhm.
surgery. There's so many things that we do to
Yeah.
cover these things. I don't wanna do any of those things. I wanna be who I am, and I want the world to see me for who I am, flaws and all.
Yeah,
And some people are gonna hopefully receive it in a positive way. Other people may not, be so keen on it, and that's okay. I just want to be truth to my journey.
exactly. So great. Okay. So how can people connect with you if they would like to? What are your handles?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would love, if you are so inclined and so interested, you can catch me on social, on Instagram and Facebook. My handle is at Community Impact Consulting. So, again, that's at Community Impact Consulting. And that will connect you to the work that I do in social justice, in community arts, in advocacy, and mental health, and continue to amplify that work. So if that's something that is of interest to you, I would love to connect with you.
Amazing. And what about LinkedIn? Are you on there?
Yeah, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn as well. And again, if you just search my name, Parul Pandya, you'll definitely find me smiling away. If you are so inclined, please do connect with me on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Okay. Guess what, Parole?
What is it, Salima?
You have just dared yourself to share. Congratulations.
Woo!
Okay, my dear, how does it feel? What was the experience like for you?
Well, I would just say first and foremost, it was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience, and also, not only the opportunity to kind of, it felt like kind of reliving, right? Like for me, because it's kind of, I haven't kind of sat with
Mhm,
telling this story in some time. When I was closer to the story, I
mhm.
was definitely telling it, a lot more frequently. So, in some way, to be honest with you, it's making me feel really proud.
Oh, that's lovely. And I'm so thankful for your willingness to be part of this podcast and the way that you shared with such compassionate energy what it was like to struggle with your mental health and walking us through the leaps and bounds of your journey that has led you to where you stand today, so proud and tall and with that smiling, lovely, beautiful, gentle energy. I mean, you have shared details about your pivot and reminders for the listeners to take in. I can't thank you enough, just having this raw and personal chat with me. And most of all, for your daring and sharing. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much to you for creating this platform for stories like mine and many, many others to be told. So that we can dare to share. So thank you. And that energy is sent right back to you, my friend.
Thank you. I'm so hopeful that it will help others to come forward and tell a story of their own for sure. So once again, Parul, thank you for being a part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma.
Thank you, Salima.
To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.